I'm painting a forest landscape in gouache today, and this is a scene with two tall spruces in front of dark forest, and it's late summer when the grass is golden and the fireweeds are in bloom. So I'm starting with my sketch, and this is going to be a quick sketch. I'm just getting the basic shapes for a bit of reference so that I know where I can put in the major masses, so to speak, and everything else I will figure out once I have my paints out. So I'm adding the path in the middle and the two tall trees, and then the grass on the left and the right, and the trees in the background. I'm using titanium white, cadmium yellow, raw sienna, burnt umber, ultramarine blue, and a bit of purple magenta. I'm starting with the sky in this very subdued blue, so this gray blue, just to get rid of the white of the paper. And I also add some very diluted raw sienna to the lower part of the painting. And again, a bit of this darker gray for the path in the middle. So right now I'm adding a lot of water to my paint. You can't see the mixes that I'm doing, but I'm still treating this like essentially like a watercolor. But I know that I will add opaque layers later, so I can be really loose and a bit sloppy with my painting technique right now. It doesn't really matter if I paint over any object, because I know I can bring it back with subsequent layers later. So you can see I'm adding the trees and a bit of green here and there. So this is just to get in the main idea, the main elements of the painting. I've added a bit too much of this darker gray here, and you can see I'm making it lighter with my white. So I'm applying the white directly here. And for this scene, I want to capture the mood that I remember from days like these, when it's late summer and it's still really warm, and you can hear the birds and the cicadas, and it's really this golden hour and the tranquility in the forest, and this is what draws me into this picture. I'm mixing a dark color for the trees in the back with ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and you can see I'm using less water already, so the layer that goes over my initial layer uses less water so that the paint can be opaque and go over it. And I'm still working fairly loose, so I'm using my big flat brush for this, and I'm applying the paint in a very free manner. And it almost looks black in the video, but really the paint layer is more like this dark blue. I'm using this raw sienna mix to indicate a bit of the grass in the background, and now I'm spreading the same color to the foreground. And I'm using this dry brush technique to show a bit of the structure of the grass, so the texture, that it can come out a little bit better. Doing it on the other side too. And I'm adding a bit more white. So I still want this grass to look quite warm. So I'm not adding too much white, because white always cools down colors a bit. But I want to have a little bit of this shimmer, of this golden shimmer that the grass has. I'm mixing up a green, so this is a fairly dull green that can go into the background and the undergrowth, so to speak. And I'm mixing in a bit of a warm color like this raw sienna and a bit of yellow for the greens in the foreground. And bit by bit I'm adding the tree structures that are in the middle ground So I'm still trying to use my brush as loose as I can, and I really want to put the big shapes into the picture right now. So I'm not trying to think about the small details and making everything fit into the shape that I can see on my reference. Adding a bit of structure to the trees in the far back. And a bit of shadow. And now I realize before I can paint on more details, I want to finish the sky. So I add another layer of light gray. And then I realize that it's a bit too dark, and I add some white, and you can see there was some yellow in my white because the brush was a bit dirty, but this actually doesn't matter, and I quite like the effect. So these are sort of like thunderstorm clouds that are almost a bit yellow. So now the sky looks like I can leave it like this and work on the elements that are on top of it. I'm squeezing my brush a bit so that I can a more structured stroke from it. And you can see I'm also using my fingers to take back a bit of the paint that I have on the brush. And I'm also adding a bit of this highlight on the right. You will see me going over these areas again and again, so I think I added a bit too much white and I smeared it too much on the left side, so I will have to rework it. Yeah, there you can see I added more of this burnt sienna. Now I'm using a round brush that I also squeezed a little bit so that the bristles come apart, and I'm using this to add more structure to this path in the foreground. So I want the gravel and the texture to come out, and I'm doing this with my round brush. Bit of the green in the middle of the path, or almost like a road really. And I'm adding more of this warmer green that I can see in the middle of the grasses on the left and the right. And I think this gives a good amount of warmth to the scene. Adding a bit of structure in the background forest, but not too much, because I don't want to be too much focus on the background. I'm adding a few red dabs with my burnt sienna. So there are actually these bushes that have red elements to them, and also some of the grasses in the foreground have this red shine. So it's almost autumn in that forest, and I want to show that with the choice of colors that I have here. So there are a lot of warm colors, especially in the foreground, and then the gray sky and this dark blue forest in the back to add a balance to the scene. And this is the kind of landscape that I grew up in. So this is a small mountain range, quite almost in the middle of Germany. A lot of dark forests, and then these areas with tall golden grass. And I really have a lot of fond memories of this kind of landscape. And I really love painting these too. I hope you can see why. I'm still working on the path, so now I'm bringing a few warmer brown tones into the mix, and I'm restating that grass in the middle. And I'm lightening things up a bit with a white. And now I'm adding these small grasses with my rigger brush, so I can get really thin lines out of it, and I want to work out some of these details of the grasses. And while I have my rigger brush active, I'm using it to add a bit more texture onto this road in the middle. And you can see I'm dragging the brush across the paper to get a lot of texture out of it, so that the line breaks up a bit more. I'm adding more single grass stalks in the foreground and then just some kind of light texture in the back. Because of course you won't see too much details farther back. Now I'm adding the stalks of the fireweed that grows in between these grass patches. And this is just such a lovely, intense pink flower that grows in these meadows and is in bloom in late summer. And I will add the blooms in a minute. And this is why I have added the purple magenta to my palette, because I need it for this intense pink that the flower has. Here you can see I'm mixing that magenta tone, and I'm trying to not let it be too intense, but still pink enough so that it can read in front of the red grasses. I will mix a lighter version of it to add a bit of contrast and a bit of different values. You can see I'm working with the side of my brush just to indicate the blooms on the right side. So I'm not painting in every single flower head that I can see on my reference photo. And I'm adding a few light clouds before I add the tall trees in the middle of the painting. By the way, I think the name fireweed is a very fitting name for this beautiful pink flower. The name is not as dramatic in German, so I really love that English name of this plant. I'm adding a few dark corners on the edge of the road to give it a bit of a contour. And now I'm adding details and texture in the front of the road. And there are little stones and sticks lying around, and I want to show some of that. Now with my round brush and a dark mix, I'm adding the two trees in the background, and these are tall spruces that are already quite old. And I've squeezed the bristles again of my brush. And you can see I'm painting this from the top so that they actually point in the right direction. I'm working with a lighter, dull olive mix here, and in a minute I will add a few more dark parts to these trees. So again, mixing my blue, my ultramarine with burnt sienna and burnt umber. And now these trees get really more of a structure and they stand against the light sky. And these spruces are definitely affected by bark beetles, so that's a common problem in these kind of spruce forests. For these smaller details that are dark on top of light, you can see I don't need to use my paint in a really opaque and thick way, so I can paint on fairly thin paint but with a little bit of water, and it will still read as a new layer. You will often see me when I just want to add structure, like for the gravel road here in the front, that I use sort of thin paint layers just to add a bit of structure to the scene. And now I'm mixing this light pink to add a few highlights to the fireweed blooms, just to bring them out a bit more. You can see I only painted 2 or 3 of the blooms on the left in the foreground like they really appear, and the rest of them I really just indicate with these small brush strokes, like these small dots. So basically any mass that I can read, any paint blob that to me doesn't read as a tree or a bush, I know I need to add a few other values to make the shape three-dimensional. So with gouache, if you add a thin layer on top of an existing layer, the paint will sort of sink into the layers beneath, and this will often give a very subtle effect, but it might also mean that you will have to paint this layer again with a bit of a thicker paint mix. Sometimes this will give a really nice effect and just the thing that you were looking for, and sometimes you will need to paint over it again. I'm removing my masking tape, so that means the sketch is basically finished. But I will add a few details with my colored pencils. So here's some pink and some light yellow to bring out more of the grass and the flowers. And I use these colored pencils just to add a bit of texture to my existing sketch. I really enjoy the textures that I can get out of these pencils. I'm just adding a few grass blades here and there. And a few more branches to these tall spruces in the back. Which wasn't really necessary, but oh well. And with a bit of water on my brush, I'm removing a few of the lines that I made just to smooth everything out again. And the last thing I'm doing is to add back a bit of the gravel on the road and a bit of shadow in the foreground. And that's basically it. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you found it useful, then give me a like or consider subscribing to my channel. That way I will come back soon with another tutorial about watercolor or gouache. If you have any questions, then let me know in the comments. Also, if you'd like to see something specific, just leave me a comment and I'm happy to get new ideas from all of you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, happy sketching!